at all about moral reasons, and therefore it is literally false to say that I should or should not do whatever it is that morality commands me to do. That might be a bit of an unappealing option, and it also might leave us with some other problems as well. For instance, we would have to explain what "you should not murder people" actually means if we say it to somebody who doesn't have the right moral motivations. That's not necessarily an impossible task, but it is philosophical work. Another option is to say that this isn't going to tear morality down or anything, we just need to rephrase a few things. So instead of saying, "you should not murder people," we need to say, "if you don't want to go to prison, you shouldn't murder people. If you don't want to feel guilty, you shouldn't murder people. If you don't want people to dislike you, you shouldn't murder people." We find a way of linking morality to motivations for something else that's a bit more selfish. But even then, you might not like that option. You might want to say, well, murdering people is wrong because of what it does to the other person, to the victim. Never mind what you want or don't want. Isn't morality meant to be about other people? Part 2. Playing with yourself. There's a sneaky third tactic here. Maybe we don't have to give up on moral absolutism or reasons internalism. Maybe we can say, yes, moral reasons don't apply unless you have the right motivations, but it just so happens that every human being has those motivations anyway, and therefore we've basically got the best of both worlds. One of the more famous attempts to do this comes from Kant, who we've talked about in more detail on the show before. Kant says that part of being a rational being, a being that can appreciate reasons, is that there are some reasons that will always motivate you. The analogy I like is to gravity. So part of having mass is that wherever you go, if there's gravity, it's going to be pulling on you. Similarly, Kant says that part of having a mind is that wherever you go, if there are moral reasons, they're going to be pulling on you. In fact, even deeper than that, Kant thought that because moral reasons are built into having a mind, they come from within. You actually give morality to yourself. You place yourself under moral restrictions. So he's kind of got the reasons internalism angle covered. That's why morality seems so powerful and always pulls on us, because it's actually coming from us. But he's also got the reasons externalism angle covered as well. Everybody with a mind is motivated in this way as part of having a mind. The combination of these two ideas allows Kant to say that being bad is actually irrational, because you are not doing what you are necessarily motivated to do. You're essentially contradicting yourself. Kant's not the only philosopher to play this card. Simon Critchley takes a modern crack at it. He says that the human self is essentially constructed around moral values. Basically, there are no value-neutral human beings who have no preferences about anything. To be a human is to be essentially value-driven. In particular, he says that moral values help us construct the self. We experience a moral demand, but a moral demand must be addressed to somebody, so there must be a self there, but the self must also already exist to recognize and approve of the demand. So he says that moral demands and the self construct each other simultaneously in a very Inception-style way. We create and perceive the self at the same time. Critchley writes, "The self is something that shapes itself through its relation to whatever it determines as good. Whether that is the Torah, the resurrected Christ, the moral law, the community in which I live, suffering humanity, all God's creatures, or whatever, what we think of as a self is fundamentally an ethical subject, a self that is constituted in relation to its good." What this allows Critchley, and in a different way Kant, to say is that if I act in such a way that I know to be evil, then I am acting in a manner destructive to the self that I am. Interestingly, Critchley thinks that the human self is essentially in two parts. There's the self that we experience, and there's the ideal self that we think we should be. We don't always live up to our ideal selves, but nevertheless, we build them up in our minds. We put them there. And so the moral reasons that motivate us, even though they come from within the self, can appear to be external to the self that we experience. Part 3. Evil! So we've talked a lot about people being motivated to do good, but what about the inverse? people being motivated to avoid doing evil. Critchley argued that the human self is constructed in relation to the moral good of which it approves, but why should moral approval be more fundamental to the self than other kinds of approval, like, say, taking pleasure in something? Or indeed, why should it be more fundamental than disapproval? He's argued that there are no value-neutral humans, and okay, fine, but not all values are moral or even positive. To fill part of this gap, I want to bring in a brand new piece of philosophy from my teacher and friend, Justin Snedeker, and the idea is called contrastive reasons. Snedeker argues that wherever you have a reason to go to the shops, that will always be a reason to go to the shops rather than stay at home or rather than go to the pub. Reasons always provide a contrast against some alternatives. So if we want to know whether something is rational, we need to be able to put it in that context and say rational as opposed to what? The alternatives are never infinite. It wouldn't make sense to say that it's rational to go to the shops rather than go to Venus, because going to Venus was never really an option, but whatever is rational is always rational in context. What happens if we take contrastive reasons and plug them into something like Kant or Critchley's ideas about humans being inherently sensitive to moral reasons? Well, we'd get the idea that as well as human selves being constructed around our desires to do good, we are also constructed around the desire to do good as opposed to doing evil. Critchley's fond of biblical references, so I'll put it like this. The apple that Adam and Eve ate came not from the tree of knowledge of good, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So to be a human subject is to have built-in impulses about good and evil. Interestingly, Critchley thinks that these moral impulses, if they exist, and for lack of a better term, are activated by the moral demands that other people place on us. So being open-minded to other people's perspectives is essential for morality. And that is going to be very important in episode 4. In this episode 2, we've looked at some attempts philosophers have made to tie rationality to morality. In episode 3, we're going to change tack slightly and talk about how the words rational and irrational are used. And we're going to start by getting all emotional. If you like today's lesson, I have a tip jar at paypal.me/philosophytube. Think of it like me putting a hat round at the end of the lecture. Or patreon.com/philosophytube is where you could make a monthly donation to help me keep making videos like this one. And don't forget to subscribe.